Billionaire opens a wrong number message, sees his ex-girl shivering in snow, shielding her fragile children. Boston's winter didn't care for poetry. It hit the city like a thief with a crowbar, quick, brutal, and shameless. Wind came galloping down Tremont Street, a hard-cutting thing that set faces stinging and lungs scratching for mercy. Snow, long past its postcard charm, had turned to dirty crusts along the curbs, jagged patches that made every step feel like walking across broken glass. On one corner, where a brick wall caught the worst of the gusts, a metal bench sat bolted to the pavement, as forgotten as an old debt. Clara Evans had claimed it for the night. She huddled there, her frame folded inward around two small bundles pressed tight against her ribs. The twins breathed unevenly, their heads tucked against her chest, the faint warmth of their bodies seeping into hers like embers barely clinging to life. Clara held them close, not from fear they might slip away, but to trap whatever heat they shared between the three of them. A ragged blanket wrapped them together, its edges worn thin as promises that had been made too quickly. A bus rattled by, engine groaning, lights flashing over the trio before vanishing into the storm. It didn't slow, not even a courtesy pause. A man in a heavy parka trudged past, his boots grinding against frozen grit. He gave them a look, the quick, sideways glance of someone who didn't want to see too much, then dropped his eyes and kept moving. The wind swallowed his footprints almost before they formed. Clara flexed her fingers, stiff with cold, and reached for the one fragile piece of technology standing between her children and the long night. A cracked phone, its battery symbol bleeding out in red. Pride muttered in her ear not to use it. Pride was the one thing she'd managed to keep when everything else had been stripped away. But hunger growled louder, and cold had a voice that couldn't be ignored. Her thumb scrolled down to a number she knew as well as her own name. Sophie. Not blood, but the closest thing she had left to family. They had shared walls and bills once, back when life had room for laughter. Clara hesitated, her jaw clenched. To ask was to admit defeat, yet her children's shallow breaths pressed against her, and the hesitation cracked. She typed slowly, her fingers stiff as sticks. "Can we stay with you tonight? Just until morning. The kids are freezing." The wind jerked at the screen as she pressed send. She didn't notice the digit her thumb had slipped on. 4 blocks away, inside a tower of glass that hummed with central heating and ambition, Ethan Cole left a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne. Midnight meetings didn't rattle him. Numbers never cared what the clock read. But tonight's session had left a knot in his shoulders, the kind that no glass of bourbon could smooth out. The hallway outside gleamed with too much polish. Its silence padded, as if money could muffle even the air. Ethan tugged at his tie, felt the building's heat pressing down, and welcomed the vibration in his pocket as a distraction. He expected another update from finance, another plea for his signature. Instead, the message froze him where he stood. "Can we stay with you tonight? Just until morning. The kids are freezing. Sender, Clara." The letters hit harder than the wind outside. Clara, 6 years gone without a word. No call, no explanation, only absence, the kind that gnawed rather than healed. And now, 12 words that shoved the past straight into his chest. His eyes locked on one word, kids. Something old and painful twisted in his gut. A location tag blinked beneath the text, courtesy of some automatic setting. Tremont Street. Car, now. Tremont Street, he told his driver, voice sharp enough to leave no room for questions. The city blurred past the windows, sodium lights flickering against snowbanks, sirens wailing somewhere out in the dark. Ethan leaned forward in his seat, the phone clenched tight in his fist. He told himself it might be a mistake, a prank, a stranger with a similar name, but hope and fear rode side by side, twin passengers he hadn't invited and couldn't shake. When the car slowed beneath a crooked street lamp, Ethan was already pushing the door open. The wind slapped him, sharp as broken glass, biting through his coat before his shoes hit the frozen grit. There she was. Clara sat hunched on the bench, the blanket pulled high, her arms locked around two small shapes curled into her body. Her head lifted as he stepped into the light, her eyes wide, caught between disbelief and dread. For a moment the storm seemed to hush, as if even the city wanted to watch this collision. Ethan's gaze moved to the children, their faces half buried in her coat, then back to hers. His voice came out steady, though inside him everything pitched like a ship in high seas. "Are they warm enough?" Clara tightened her grip on the blanket. Her voice was clipped, flat. "We'll manage. You should go." He took a step closer, breath fogging between them. "Let me help." Just for tonight. Her mouth opened, refusal already rising, but the girl coughed, a dry, papery sound, too thin for comfort, too sharp to ignore. Clara's shoulders sagged, her jaw clenched, and she closed her eyes for a heartbeat. When they opened again, she gave one slow nod. The nod weighed more than words. The ride back through the city was a kind of silence lesson. The sedan hummed along slush-streaked avenues while the heater rattled bravely against the frost. Street lamps smeared amber light across the windows, making the snow look like handfuls of ash tossed in the wind. Clara sat rigid, shoulders pressed against the door, her arms locked around both children. They had slumped against her like weary passengers on a long train, their breaths shallow, fogging little circles on her coat. She stared at the glass as if Boston's skyline might offer an exit. All she saw were towers glittering like they'd been built out of arrogance and polished ice. Ethan, in the opposite seat, leaned forward with his hands clasped so tight the knuckles had turned pale. He had sat in the same car 100 times, leaving deals, dinners, and the occasional gala. But never had the leather felt so stiff, never had the silence pressed against him so heavily. His mind counted years, the way an accountant tallies losses. 6 of them, everyone stamped with what-ifs and empty space. The word kids from her message looped in his chest like a warning bell. He wanted to ask. He wanted to demand. Instead, he sat and listened to the soft rasp of his driver's wipers beating time against the storm. The car nosed up to his building, 40 stories of glass and steel rising smugly into the sky. The revolving doors were polished to a mirror, reflecting a world that had no intention of recognizing Clara Evans or the 2 children sagging against her shoulders. Ethan stepped out first, the winter air slicing across his face, and extended a hand he knew she would ignore. She did. She lifted her son higher on one hip, clutched her daughter's mitten tighter, and walked past him into the lobby with the posture of someone bracing for judgment. The doorman looked once, then remembered his training and looked away. Money buys discretion as surely as it buys marble floors. The elevator accepted Ethan's keycard without protest, whisking them upward in silence broken only by the faint groan of cables. The children stirred faintly, then sank back into that heavy, exhausted sleep that only the very young or the utterly defeated can manage. Clara's reflection stared back at her in the mirrored wall, pale, eyes rimmed red, mouth tight as a knot. She thought, "Don't let them see you as desperate. Not him. Not anyone." The doors parted into quiet and warmth. Ethan's penthouse stretched wide. The city spread out in glass panels behind it. Light from the street below wavered up like embers from some distant fire. Clara's boots squeaked against polished wood. The sound felt foreign, intrusive. She shifted the children to the couch, unwrapped the blanket, and began tugging stiff boots from small feet with careful fingers. Their socks were damp, nearly frozen stiff. She rubbed each foot briskly, coaxing blood back, whispering under her breath words meant more for herself than for them. Ethan stood near the doorway, unsure whether to step closer or stay back. He had never felt like a guest in his own home before. His coat hung half off his shoulders, and he couldn't seem to make his hands unclasp. Watching her there, bent over the children, pulling life back into their limbs, he felt a strange combination of awe and guilt, as if he were intruding on something sacred. "I'll call down for food," he said, finally, voice low, trying not to startle the fragile calm. She didn't answer, just tucked the boy tighter into the blanket and smoothed her daughter's hair flat against her forehead. Ethan pressed the phone to his ear, ordered soup and bread, though his voice cracked once when he almost said for the kids. He caught himself, swallowed it. Room service arrived with the efficiency of people used to being invisible. A cart rolled in, steaming with chicken broth and buttered rolls. The smell filled the air, heavy with comfort. Clara sat the twins upright, coaxing spoonfuls to their mouths. "Slowly," she murmured, though their eager gulps betrayed their hunger. Watching them eat, Ethan felt something he hadn't known in years. Relief that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or closing deals. He set extra napkins on the table, ladled out bowls, and busied himself with practicalities because his hands needed work. He caught himself stealing glances at the boy's jawline, at the girl's dark lashes. Something about them tugged at his chest in ways he didn't want to measure yet. When the bowls were empty, Clara wiped small mouths with the precision of ritual. The boy coughed, lighter than before, but enough to snap her head around in worry. Ethan's eyes met hers. Neither spoke, but the message was plain. This was not over. "I'll get blankets," he said, disappearing down the hall and returning with armfuls. He spread them across the sofa, layering warmth. The children settled, breaths evening into the rhythm of early sleep. Clara leaned down, kissed each forehead, and stayed there longer than she needed to, as if her lips could stand guard better than any lock. She straightened, found Ethan standing a few paces off. The air between them carried 6 years of words unsaid. She crossed her arms over her chest, armor against what she feared he might ask. "Just tonight," she said firmly, eyes daring him to argue. "Just tonight," he echoed, though the words sank into him like stones dropped in water. He pulled a pillow from the closet and set it at the far end of the sectional, a declaration of boundaries without speech. She nodded once, a soldier acknowledging terms of a fragile truce. The lamps dimmed. Only the city's glow painted the glass. The twins shifted in their sleep, rustling like paper being folded. Clara sank into the couch, her back into the window, and shut her eyes. Ethan took the opposite side, lowering himself as if the cushions were made of memory instead of leather. The night gathered around them, full of unasked questions and borrowed warmth. And for the first time in 6 years, they lay in the same room, silent, cautious, alive. Morning crept into the penthouse slow and pale, like a guest who wasn't sure he'd been invited. The snow outside reflected the first rays of light, turning the windows into giant mirrors with a hint of gold brushed across the edges. Down below, the city was shaking off the night. Delivery vans coughing awake, a garbage truck groaning like an old man getting out of bed. Inside, the heat whispered through vents and the room smelled faintly of coffee grounds someone had forgotten to throw out the night before. Clara woke with a start. Her neck ached from the couch's narrow armrest, and a draft clung to her ankles where the blanket had slipped away. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then her eyes landed on the huge windows, the skyline bending toward daylight, and everything returned like a tide she tried to outrun. The twins were still asleep, folded into each other like puzzle pieces that only fit when pressed close. She leaned down, laid her palm across their foreheads one after the other. No fever. Warm enough. The relief was sharp, almost bitter, because relief meant she'd been afraid. Ethan was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, moving with the quiet concentration of a man who didn't want to be noticed, doing something unusual. A skillet hissed on the stove. The smell of butter clung to the air. He poured coffee into a mug and stood for a second, just watching the steam curl. He had attended shareholder breakfasts with silver chafing dishes and speeches that cost more than most folks' salaries. But cracking eggs and buttering toast for 3 people who didn't carry his name felt stranger than any gala ever had. The twins padded in, eyes puffy from sleep, hair bent in directions pillows had dictated. The girl clutched her stuffed rabbit by one ear, dragging it like a prisoner of war. The boy rubbed his nose on his sleeve and yawned wide enough to show every tooth. Clara ushered them forward with a hand at each shoulder, murmuring, "Say thank you." They mumbled it shyly as Ethan slid plates across the counter, scrambled eggs, toast still shining from the pan, mugs of milk warmed on the stove. They ate quietly at first, clinking spoons the loudest sound in the room. The boy tried balancing a slice of bread on his sister's head until Clara shot him a look sharp enough to cut butter. Ethan caught himself smiling before he wiped it off his face. He watched her more than he meant to, watched the way her eyes softened when she studied the children, then iced over quick as frost when she noticed him watching too. Halfway through, the boy coughed. Not violent, but persistent. A dry scrape that didn't belong in a throat that young. Clara froze, spoon still halfway to her mouth. She pressed her hand against his back, whispered, "Drink slow, sweetheart." But worry had already stolen the color from her cheeks. Ethan set his mug down. He should see a doctor. Clara's head snapped up. "We'll manage," she said, a reflex so quick it sounded rehearsed. "You managed the sidewalk last night," he replied, his tone as flat as the counter between them. "This is different." The boy coughed again, and the argument died on her lips. Pride is loud, but illness speaks louder. She gave him the smallest nod, not in surrender to him, but to the truth. The clinic sat on a side street where snow had turned gray from passing tires. Inside, it smelled of antiseptic and long hours, sharp and tired all at once. The waiting room was full of parents with the same hollow-eyed look, coats still dusted with salt. Cartoon posters on the wall promised healthy teeth and strong lungs, though the children studying them didn't look convinced. Clara perched on a plastic chair, keeping both twins pressed close. Her daughter leaned against her hip, rabbit still in hand, while the boy sat coughing lightly into his sleeve. Ethan strode to the counter, where a nurse in cheerful scrubs handed him a clipboard. Parent's name? She asked without looking up. He hesitated only a second. Cole, he said, and wrote it down in neat block letters. Clara saw it. The name glared back from the form like ink drawn too heavy. She felt her stomach tighten. Not his fault, she told herself. Not the nurse's either. But that single word carried more claim than she'd agreed to give. The examination room was bright, lights buzzing overhead. The doctor, a woman with tired eyes softened by years of children's fevers and frightened mothers, pressed a stethoscope to the boy's chest. She listened, tilting her head as if the lungs were whispering a story just for her. A mild respiratory infection, she pronounced. Fluids, rest, and this prescription. He'll be fine in a few days. The words landed in Clara's chest like warm stones. Relief flooded her limbs, chased by guilt that she hadn't been able to prevent the sickness in the first place. The boy swung his legs against the exam table, boots knocking a rhythm. His sister poked a tongue depressor against her knee, giggling at its bounce. Clara almost smiled despite herself. Ethan took the prescription slip without comment, tucked it into his coat, and paid at the desk. He didn't glance at her for thanks, didn't ask for recognition. But Clara saw it anyway. The way his shoulders dropped slightly when the bottle was bagged, the way his grip tightened around it as if holding medicine meant holding the future still. Gratitude stirred in her, hot and unwanted. Gratitude, she thought, was a leash if you let it. Outside, snow was falling again, flakes melting on their cheeks before they could admire them. Ethan walked a half step ahead, holding doors, guiding them back toward the car. He looked back once, and for an instant Clara's eyes met his, sharp, suspicious, unwilling to soften. She tugged the children closer, their hands buried in her coat. "We'll be gone soon," she murmured, half to herself. Ethan didn't argue. Not yet. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of winter ceiling that made noon feel like dusk. After the clinic, Ethan steered them into a side street where a neon pharmacy cross buzzed against the gloom. Inside, the heat was too high, the air thick with disinfectant and old carpet. Clara lingered near the entrance, her daughter tucked into one arm, while Ethan moved briskly toward the counter with the prescription slip. The pharmacist slid the bottle into a paper bag, along with a measuring spoon. Ethan added cough drops and a small digital thermometer before Clara could protest. When he returned, she noticed the bulge of a larger box, something she hadn't asked for. "What's that?" she demanded softly. "A humidifier," he answered. "Helps him breathe easier at night." Clara's lips tightened. She wanted to say they couldn't carry such a thing, that she hadn't agreed to extras. But her son tugged weakly at her coat, coughing again, and the argument died before it began. She pressed her mouth shut and followed him out, her silence a verdict all its own. They crossed the street to a grocery where cold air rolled off open freezers. Ethan took a cart and began moving down the aisles. Clara didn't touch the handle, but her voice directed choices in short, firm commands. Oatmeal, not sugared cereal. Apples, not oranges. Broth instead of canned soup. He obeyed without remark, plucking items from shelves and placing them in the cart with careful precision, as though handling shares on a volatile market. The twins toddled beside them, fascinated by the bins of fruit. The boy asked if he could climb the orange pyramid. The girl pressed her palms to the lobster tank and asked if the creatures had names. Clara hushed them both with a weary patience, but Ethan caught himself smiling at their curiosity, a smile he quickly folded away. At the back of the store hung racks of children's coats, heavy and padded. Ethan stopped, pulled down two, and studied the tags. Clara's eyes flicked to the price, then to the thin fabric straining at her children's elbows. She said nothing, but the faintest nod betrayed her. Ethan added mittens clipped together by strings, the kind that anticipated small losses. In the checkout line, Clara kept her hands on the twins' shoulders, her posture stiff. When the boy coughed again, she glanced down, worried, then caught Ethan watching. Her eyes flashed with warning. Don't mistake this for permission. The ride back was quiet. Snow smeared across the windshield, and the city moved past in slow frames, buses huffing at corners, pedestrians hunched into scarves, streetlights blinking through flurries. The children dozed against each other, their breath fogging the windows. Clara stared out, measuring exits she had no strength to take. Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw set like stone, though his eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror. At the penthouse, they carried bags inside. Clara moved quickly, stowing groceries with the efficiency of someone afraid to be accused of laziness. She poured water into the humidifier, set it humming on the floor near the sofa. She laid the new coats across a chair without comment, as though not acknowledging them might keep gratitude from binding her too tightly. Ethan busied himself with the kitchen, pulling pans from cupboards. Soon the smell of grilled cheese drifted through the room, butter popping, bread crisping to gold. Tomato soup simmered in a pot, filling the air with warmth. The twins woke hungry and ate eagerly, dipping sandwiches into the steaming bowls. Clara broke their bread into small pieces, reminding them to chew slow. Ethan watched quietly, his hands resting on the counter, the corners of his mouth tugged by something dangerously close to contentment. After lunch, Clara wiped mouths and tucked the children back beneath blankets. They drifted into sleep, their bodies limp with the trust only children carry. She lingered in the doorway, watching their chests rise and fall, then pulled the door almost shut. Her hand hovered on the knob a moment longer before letting go. She sat on the sofa, her back straight, her face unreadable. Ethan came from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. He set one in front of her, took the chair opposite, and for a long time, neither spoke. The radiator hummed, traffic whispered far below, and the apartment seemed to breathe around them. 6 years, he said finally, voice low. 6 years, she echoed, her eyes fixed on the rising steam. I searched, he added. I thought you'd changed your number or your mind, but I tried. Her fingers tightened on the mug. I know what you tried, and I know what they did to make sure it looked like you hadn't tried hard enough. They, he repeated, though the word had already taken a face in his thoughts. Clara lifted the mug, let the steam cover her expression. I left because staying would have ruined you. They made that clear enough. I thought absence was the only shield I had. She set the cup down. Turns out, absence can cut as deep as presence. This is me you're talking about, he said. Not angry, just raw. This is your family, she answered, and they never needed your permission to decide. He leaned back, staring at the skyline as if it could offer him a different history. I can't change what I didn't know, he said slowly, but I can damn well change what happens next. She didn't nod, didn't smile, but her silence lacked the edge it usually carried. When she rose to check the twins, Ethan retreated to his study. He shut the door only halfway, sat at the desk, and pulled out his phone. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, older, sharper, tired. "I need a favor," he told the contact when the line clicked alive. "Look into rental records, forwarding addresses, anything with Clara Evans' name. Quietly. Start with Richard." The reply was short. "Understood." He set the phone face down, the screen's glow bleeding across polished wood. Back in the living room, Clara stood at the window, watching snow chase itself around street lamps. Her hand rested lightly on the glass, feeling the cold seep through. Behind her, the humidifier purred. From the bedroom came the even rhythm of sleeping children. She whispered to herself, though no one could hear, 2 days. That's all. From his study, Ethan watched the snow too, his jaw tight. He didn't believe in coincidences, and he didn't believe in surrender. 2 days, he thought, is long enough to start a war or to end one. The storm camped over Boston like it had signed a long lease, filling the streets with snowdrifts and closing off the sky with gray curtains. From the penthouse windows, the city below looked less like a place people lived and more like a frozen map pinned under glass. Heaters hissed and clanked as if they resented the overtime. Clara stayed. She told herself it was temporary, a pause, not a surrender. Her son's cough dictated the schedule more than she did. Spoons of syrup every few hours, humidifier humming its ghostly breath, a warm corner to sleep in. Pride insisted she should leave. Love insisted otherwise. And love always had the louder voice when children were involved. Ethan moved through those snowbound days like a man fumbling with new tools. He measured medicine carefully, crouching until his eyes were level with the boys. When the child swallowed without protest, Ethan rinsed the spoon under the tap as though cleanliness could erase 6 years of absence. He felt a small, unexpected victory bloom in his chest, and it startled him more than any stock market swing ever had. Books multiplied on the coffee table, a blue truck that refused to hurry, rabbits counting shadows, fish glowing in black water. His voice wasn't dramatic. Years of boardrooms had rubbed the showmanship out of it, but it was steady, and the twins leaned closer as if steadiness was all they'd ever needed. Clara, sitting by the window, tried to keep her eyes on the snow. But when his voice caught on a passage about a lost bear, her gaze flicked toward him. Recognition stirred, then shame for letting it show, and she turned back quickly. Mornings carried the smell of toast and dark coffee. Clara cut apples into cubes as neat as dice, measuring order into a world that rarely gave her any. Her hand drifted to her son's forehead, even after the thermometer gave its verdict. Boots stayed near the door, angled outward, a reminder to herself that escape was always an option. Ethan offered oatmeal. She told him the twins liked cinnamon. When he found the jar on his own, her shoulders loosened for a heartbeat, then tensed again, guilty for noticing. One afternoon, snow thickened until the skyline blurred. The twins wore their new coats indoors and played astronauts on the rug. Stomping across moondust, Ethan sat cross-legged with a dinosaur on his knee, listening gravely to mission reports. The boy declared that the T-Rex would protect them from sneeze monsters. Ethan nodded solemnly, thinking it was the best prescription he'd ever heard. He wondered if there was a cure for missing 6 years and what price he'd pay if one existed. Clara hovered at the edge of their play, arms folded, lighthouse and watchtower at once. Anger rose at how easily Ethan fit where he hadn't before. Yet beneath that, a softer truth gnawed at her. It was easier to breathe when someone else carried part of the weight. She smothered that thought quickly, but it lingered anyway. Evenings painted the rooms in lamp glow while wind rattled the glass. The twins collapsed in a heap, and Clara tucked the blanket around them with soldierly precision. In the kitchen, she opened the refrigerator and stared at shelves, debating milk versus water, when what she really debated was silence versus speech. Ethan washed dishes deliberately, water running hot, plates stacked carefully. At last, he said without turning, "Greg checked. There are addresses tied to you, leases you never signed, mailboxes in your name with someone else's hand." Clara closed the fridge with a bump of her hip. "I told you." They were thorough. He dried his hands slowly, folding and unfolding the towel. "Tell me straight. Who was it?" She traced a circle on the countertop. "What good is a name now?" "The damage is already written in ink. Because I need to know which hand cut the rope before I tie it back," he answered. Her throat tightened. She saw the twins asleep, heard the hum of the humidifier, and let go of silence. "Your uncle," she said. "Richard. He invited me to tea." He smiled. "He said marriage would be blood in the water. That if I stayed, you'd be dismantled piece by piece, all by people who never raised their voice. He said, if I loved you, I'd go." Ethan's jaw hardened. "Richard," he repeated, not as a question but a curse. She nodded. "He didn't shout. Men like him never do. They just write a number on a napkin and call it destiny. He gave me a date. Stay past it, and he'd destroy you first. Then my father's business, then the roof over my head. I knew he could, so I left." The only sound afterward was the heater's weary sigh. Ethan pressed his palm against the glass window, staring at a city blurred with snow. "He thought I'd thank him," he said. "He doesn't need thanks. He needs control." "I'll burn the ledger," Ethan muttered. Clara shook her head, voice low. "Men like him don't starve. They own the pantry." But he didn't look away from the glass, and she knew he was already planning a reckoning. Sleep avoided them. Ethan retreated to his study, desk lamp throwing golden circles over papers. Rental records, company ledgers, unsigned contracts that all smelled of Richard's fingerprints. His phone buzzed with names, assistants, drivers, receptionists who had seen too much while pretending not to. Each message tightened his jaw further. Clara stood at the living room window, arms wrapped around herself. Her breath fogged the glass as she whispered to no one. "No more running. Not again." The hum of the humidifier filled the silence, steady as a river. By morning, snowlight washed the sky pale. Clara lay on the sofa, boots still near the door, though this time she hadn't angled them outward. Ethan scrawled 2 words on a page. No mercy. He meant them. Marissa Grant arrived that afternoon, shedding her snowy coat, briefcase snapping open like a toolbox. She listened, took notes, drew columns. Clara watched her own life reduced to bullet points and hated how relieved she felt to share the burden. Marissa's verdict was simple. Speak first, speak true, or Richard will write the story himself. That night, Ethan read to the twins again. The T-Rex feared thunder until a smaller creature stood beside him and shared the noise. He didn't change a word, but his voice carried something new. Recognition. The children giggled. Clara watched in silence, her heart betraying her with warmth she couldn't afford. The next day, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside was a photo. Clara leaving a clinic, twins at her side. Paper clipped to it, 3 words. Do the smart thing. Ethan showed it to her. Clara didn't flinch. That's how he speaks, she said. He hands you a map and tells you the road is one way. Ethan's reply was flat. Not his road, he dialed. Richard answered smoothly, as if rehearsed. "Nephew," he said, "I was just thinking of you. You sent a photographer. I send many things. Flowers, invoices. Be precise. You sent a message to a mother," Ethan growled. "Do it again, and I drag you into sunlight." Richard chuckled. "You mistake your position. You're a note in a symphony. We don't hear you unless we want to." The line went dead. Ethan placed the phone down gently, as if not to bruise it. Clara counted silently to steady herself. "Men like him plant fear like corn," she said. "Don't stand there watching it grow." "We go first," Ethan said. "Not tomorrow. Soon. We tell it before he can rehearse." Her eyes flicked to the children's door. Pride told her no. Love told her yes. She gave a short nod, the kind that carried the weight of a signature. That night, neither slept much. Clara lay between the twins, their small bodies pressing into her like anchors. Ethan found them at dawn, watching silently, an ache lodged in his chest. Later, Marissa called again. Evidence was surfacing, a severance package too generous, a napkin scribbled with a deadline, assistants who remembered too much, threads to pull, and maybe enough to unravel Richard's empire. By evening, the apartment no longer felt like a borrowed shelter. It felt like a bunker, preparing for siege. Ethan sat across from Clara at the table. "Then it's settled," he said. "We go first." She held his gaze, then looked toward the city lights beyond the glass. "We go first," she repeated. "And we don't look down." The morning broke with a grudging smear of light over the harbor, as if the sun had a lawyer telling it to keep its head down. Ethan stood at the kitchen island, with a mug he kept forgetting to drink from, watching the espresso go cold by stages and listening to the building's HVAC breathe. Out on the glass, last night's frost curled into lace, and below the window, a gull walked the parapet like a door superintendent doing his rounds. His phone began its insect rattle against the marble. Then another, then a third. He turned them over with his fingers as though the devices were seashells that might whisper something better if he pressed harder to his ear. The first alert was a headline that knew how to bite. A glossy site in love with scandal had dressed Clara in words she wouldn't claim and fitted Ethan for a dunce cap. The photograph was long lens and merciless, caught somewhere between pharmacy and sidewalk. Clara with the twins, wind pulling her hair across her cheek. Ethan half a step behind, a shadow with a wallet. The piece called Clara Volatile, a drifter with a talent for tragedy. It called Ethan besotted, reckless with shareholders' money, foolhardy with his good name. The sentences snapped their teeth on the page. Efficient little piranhas. He set the phone down like something that might stain and reached for the mug he knew was already too bitter. Clara came in soft on her socks, the hem of one sleeve still damp from washing a cereal bowl by hand because the dishwasher's growl woke the girl. The room smelled of toast and the faint, hospital-clean tang of the liquid antibiotic they'd coaxed into their son. She saw the color in his face as soon as he looked up, the way someone in a thunder-prone county reads the sky. He turned the screen without comment, and she studied the headline for a heartbeat too long, expressionless as a locked drawer. When she spoke, it was to the kettle. "The water's not hot yet," she said, and the quiet made room for the click hum of the baseboard heat. He moved around the island and set the phone face down, as if modesty could save them now. "It's not the only one," he said. "There are calls from the board. 2 directors. An investor in Chicago who only remembers my number when he's nervous. Richard will have fingerprints on the leak, but he won't be the one in any of the photos." She lifted a hand to tuck her hair behind her ear and stopped short, fingers flattening against the curve of her neck instead, feeling for something steady. The twins' whispered quarrel drifted from the hallway about who owned which blue crayon. Their son punctuated his case with a cough he pretended didn't matter. "If they want noise," she said, "they'll get it. It's what men like your uncle play. Isn't that the whole trick? Make enough of it, and nobody can hear the truth." He watched her profile as if it were a map he used to know by memory. "Noise wins when we let it. If we don't speak first, he decides what our names mean." She poured hot water over a tea bag as though he hadn't spoken, steam lifting with a smell like cut grass and something faintly citrus. She was calculating a life that had taught her calculus without a single textbook. The twins needed quiet. Quiet required money. Money required work that didn't come with cameras. Every vector tugged at the others until her shoulders sat higher than they should. "If we go out there," she said, "we take them with us whether they're in the frame or not. I've spent years swallowing stories so the world wouldn't chew on them." He accepted the truth of it and also the futility. The boardroom had its own weather system, and it was about to throw hail. "If it were only me," he said, "I'd let them throw rocks until they got winded. But he's using you. He's using them. I won't give him that." She blew across the surface of her tea, more to test herself than the temperature. "What is it you're proposing?" "That we speak," he said, "not to a gossip column. To the rooms that matter. I tell the board the truth. You say what he did. We take the keys away from him before he drives this where he wants." She looked at the doorway where the twins were not standing yet, but would be in 2 or 5 or 10 seconds with a question about mittens or a demand for pancakes. The air held a film of winter, that fine grit of cold that sneaks in, even past double glazing. "You make it sound like a tidy errand," she said. "We'll be back by lunch. New lives, like fresh shirts." He smiled without letting it touch anywhere but his mouth. "It won't be tidy. I don't know how long it takes. I only know whose hands I want on the wheel." The boy's cough came again, drier, the sound of paper folded too many times. She set her mug down and crossed to the hall, kneeling to meet his eyes as he rounded the corner in a wobbly sock sprint, triumphantly carrying both blue crayons. She put a palm to his forehead like a spell and found him cooler than yesterday. She kissed the hair he never liked combed and sent him towards the table, then looked back at Ethan. The part of her that remembered laughing in the cheap seats at Fenway, eating fries she couldn't afford just because he'd bought them, woke and lifted its head. The part that remembered a closed door and a threat signed in someone else's handwriting did not lay down. By 9, the elevators had that restless squeal older buildings get when their nerves are up. The penthouse's private line lit like a decorated tree. The first voice belonged to a director who fancied himself reasonable because he never raised it. He congratulated Ethan on his courage the way one congratulates a man for choosing a decent tie at his own funeral. The second came from a fund manager who liked his returns as straight as his bourbon and had no use for sentiment. He wanted to know if the company had policies for this sort of thing, as though life kept a binder in a file cabinet marked, "Children you didn't know you had." Ethan said there were policies for lying. Their uncle had invented most of them. He stepped into the study and let the door rest against the jamb, but not close, the way one does when the person outside the room is the person one would run toward if the house caught fire. He called the chairwoman first because she had once told him the truth to his face, and he had thanked her for it later with a contract and an apology. She listened, the particular silence of it like someone opening a window without moving a muscle. "He's not careful," she said when he finished. "He's never been careful. He thinks the board likes a man who acts like the world owes him Saturday night. Present your numbers. Present your life. If the numbers are clean, the life will stand." He wrote 2 words on a legal pad: numbers, life, and studied how they sat next to each other as if they were old neighbors who did not wave. When he came back to the kitchen, the twins had built a civilization out of toast crusts and the salt cellar. Clara had a hand at the small of their daughter's back to keep her from colonizing the butter dish. "Bored?" she asked without looking up. "It breathes," he said. "It doesn't sing." She pushed a mug toward him. She had dressed with the right sugar without ever asking. "What exactly do you want me to say?" she asked. "When your uncle's favorite columnist asks how a nice girl wound up in a hotel with a man like you, and 2 children who bear your face." "The truth," he said. "You say it the way you told me. They pressed you. You left to keep me from losing more than you thought I could afford to lose. You did it alone because alone was what they left you." She shook her head once, not at the accuracy, but at the pain of it. "That story is a mine. You can't tell where the next footfall won't take something off." "Then we leave out the tripwires," he said, and he meant, "We will not give them the private while we defend the public. We keep names where we can. We keep the twins out of frame." He took a breath he felt too high in his chest. "I'm not asking you to carry my company on your shoulders. I'm asking you not to let him drive stakes through the ground and call it his truth." The day went on like a courtroom nobody could leave. A spin piece appeared at noon, dressed up as Concern, a delightfully generous anonymous source confiding that Ethan had a habit of letting his heart make decisions his head had to pay for. The writing took care to feel sorry for him, which is how certain men land their blows. Another item suggested Clara had moved often in the last 6 years because she liked the drama of departure. The suggestion hung like perfume that wouldn't wash off. Ethan read the paragraphs twice because he wanted to despise them precisely. Clara folded laundry with a precision born of small apartments in no time, smoothing sleeves, aligning seams, making order as an answer. In another life, she might have been something with applause built in. In this one, she had learned to treat the mundane like a slow prayer. She placed the boy's spare sweatshirt on the neat stack and let herself look at him. He was at the table drawing with both blue crayons, working on oceans and skies, and a boxy rectangle he insisted was a bus. Ethan's reflection pooled in the window behind him, the sort of double image a person gets used to when they spend years practicing how to be in and out of a room at once. "I'm not afraid of speaking," she said finally. "I'm afraid of being misheard." He set his hands flat on the counter as if bracing against a swell. "Then we pick the room," he said. "We pick the microphone. We pick the words. What about the screaming that comes after?" She didn't mean reporters. "We close the door," he said, and he meant something like, "We build thicker walls. We keep to our own table. We go for a walk at twilight when the city behaves itself for 15 minutes. She smiled, a small, tired thing that remembered what it had felt like to be large. "You make it sound like walking out to get a quart of milk." "If milk cost what a man's name cost," he said, "there wouldn't be a dairy left in New England." She laughed because he'd let her, and some of the ice in the room gave up and slid down the inside of the glass. By late afternoon, the building's doorman called up to say a different kind of visitor had stationed himself across the street with a camera and the patience of a fisherman. Ethan thanked the man and asked him to bring the package from the front desk up on his way to lunch. When the knock came, it was their lawyer instead of the package, brisk as winter, taking the room's measure with the eye of someone who knows where courts begin and end. She laid a folder on the table, its bulk promising a fight worth the paper. Richard's line is that this is not personal, she said, which is how men like him personalize things. He's put it in the market's mouth, and the market has the teeth of a raccoon. We don't argue with raccoons. We build a better latch. Clara felt the twinned pull of relief and dread that comes when a professional explains your life back to you in terms you can stand to hear. What latch? 2 steps, the lawyer said, tapping the folder without opening it. He needs the board to wobble. You give them concrete, not air. You, she looked at Ethan, show numbers and spine. You, she looked at Clara, show steadiness. Do not let them bait you into a fight you can't win with facts. Name the pressure you received without handing him a libel suit. Speak in verbs. Let him be the rumor. Clara glanced at the hall and then back. And if he drags the twins into it, then we let the city hear you without seeing them, the lawyer said. We arrange a place where the cameras have to sit 50 feet back. We make the microphones come to you. We keep their names off paper and their faces out of the frame. A mother protecting her children is not a scandal. It's a story older than the courthouse. Ethan caught the way Clara's shoulders eased at that and felt the back of his own neck cool. When? Tomorrow morning, the lawyer said. He'll go at 11. We go at 9. We make the clock a weapon. The board meets at 10. If you give them something true at 9, it will still be ringing in their ears when he tries to hand them a script at 11. Ethan nodded once, the movement of a man signing a paper he wrote himself. We'll need a room, he said, with light to make people kinder and carpets thick enough to slow the reporters down. I know that room, the lawyer said. You already lease it on the 4th floor. After she left, a hush settled, the kind that fills up a place when a plan has taken the shape of a person standing. Clara washed 2 mugs and left them upside down to dry, listening to the twins invent a game about a snow leopard living under the table. The heater clicked and the day slid toward blue at the edges. She stood at the window with her fingers curled against her palm, feeling the small half-moons, her nails pressed there, and watched the man with the camera across the street decide whether to stay for the dark. Ethan joined her and didn't touch her because some tenderness requires space to breathe. They stood shoulder to shoulder in that truce people who have loved each other too long to pretend otherwise learn to keep. Beneath them, headlights stitched a slow river. Above, the early stars made a thin show against the city's glow. We could still choose quiet, she said, and heard how the words tasted in her own mouth, like a promise kept too long. We could, he said, and he would write it for us. She let the quiet sit long enough to be sure it was ending, then nodded, a movement so slight it might have been a breath. We go at 9, she said. I will not say his name. I will say what he did. He turned his face just enough to see her profile, the jaw he recognized from photographs of her father, the steadiness he had fallen in love with when she was 19 and made of wire and will. "I'll speak to the board at 10, he said. "I will not ask permission for my life." They stayed like that while the gull made a last inspection of the parapet, and the man across the street packed his cameras and out of respect for his own fingers. The twins barreled down the hall to announce they had both decided the snow leopard was kind and only ate ice. Ethan reached for the light over the table and didn't turn it on yet, letting dusk do the softening for him. Tomorrow would be noisy. Tonight, the room was theirs, the tea mugs drying under the weight of ordinary air, the windows holding the world at bay the way good glass sometimes can. Morning came dressed in steel. The sky over Boston sagged gray and low, as if it had been drinking all night and didn't care who noticed. Clara stood in front of the mirror in the guest room, buttoning a plain black coat that had seen better winters. Her daughter sat on the bed behind her, braiding the fringe of a scarf with determined little fingers. The boy wheezed softly, scribbling shapes onto a scrap of hotel stationery Ethan had slipped into his hands. She watched their reflections more than her own. A mother's armor was never fabric. It was the steadying of her breath. In the kitchen, Ethan adjusted his tie like a man putting a leash on a wolf. Marissa, their lawyer, perched at the counter with a folder so thick it might have been carved from oak. 9 o'clock press room downstairs, she said. 10 o'clock board meeting on 14. Sequence matters. Clara first, Ethan second. You set the tone. He drives it home. Her voice carried no doubt, which was exactly why Clara distrusted it. Anyone that's sure of the future hadn't lived hers. They walked together to the elevators, their shoulders brushing but not touching. The twins were left upstairs with a trusted aide, cartoons humming low to drown out nerves. Clara pressed her palm to the elevator wall, grounding herself against the chill of brushed steel. Ethan stood like a man rehearsing lines he swore he didn't need. When the doors parted, flashbulbs already lit the hallway. The press room smelled of stale carpet and nervous coffee. Cameras squatted in rows, red lights blinking like impatient eyes. A low hum of voices filled the air, punctuated by the shuffle of equipment. Clara stepped onto the platform Marissa had chosen. She expected to flinch. She did not. The microphones were black tulips leaning toward her. For a beat, she saw nothing but light. "My name is Clara Evans," she began, voice thinner than she wanted, but steady. "6 years ago, I disappeared." A murmur rolled through the crowd. She tightened her grip on the podium. "I was told if I stayed with Ethan Cole, everything he built would be destroyed. My father's business would be ruined. Our lives would be unlivable. I left because I believed I was protecting him. I raised my children alone because silence seemed safer than truth." She paused. The sound of cameras clicking filled the space, brittle as breaking glass. She took a breath, low and deliberate. "I will not stay silent anymore. I will not let fear raise my children. The threats I received did not make me unfit. They made me cautious. And if my caution is now twisted into shame, let me be clear, I have none." The room erupted, questions thrown like stones. "Who threatened you? Were the children Ethan's? Why come forward now?" Marissa cut the air with a hand, ending the barrage. Clara stepped back, the lights blinding, her pulse like a drum in her ears. She caught Ethan's gaze at the edge of the room, solid, unshaken. He nodded once, and she knew she had cleared the first fire. 10 minutes later, Ethan faced the board. The conference room smelled of leather and old money, the sort of place where men thought oak tables could outlive truth. He stood at the head without notes, only a thin folder in his hand. Richard lounged 2 seats down, his smile sharp enough to cut rope. "I won't waste your time," Ethan began. "Yes, I have children. Yes, I failed to know them until weeks ago. That failure is mine, not theirs, not Clara's. What happened was not accident, but interference. Deliberate pressure to sever a life. That ends now." A director cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, the concern isn't your domestic arrangements. It's the market, stability, optics." Ethan set the folder down, opened it slowly. Inside were balance sheets crisp as morning frost. "Numbers are stability. Our earnings remain strong. Our contracts remain intact. The only instability is gossip, and that was manufactured. If you want optics, look here." He tapped the paper. "These are the returns you asked for. They don't falter. I suggest we stop letting noise dictate math." Richard leaned back, voice velvet and poison. "And what about liability? Emotional women, children out of wedlock. The market doesn't vote on my family," Ethan cut in, tone flat. "And if liability concerns you, perhaps you should examine your own filings." He slid a second sheet across the table. Irregularities in contracts Richard had brokered. Money shuffled through subsidiaries like laundry through too many hands. Gasps rustled down the row. The chairwoman picked up the paper, eyes narrowing. "We'll review this," she said, her tone frost on steel. Richard's smile wilted a fraction. Outside, news traveled like sparks on dry grass. Clara's words replayed across screens before Richard could find a microphone. Social media crowned her resilient, fearless, a mother against a machine. Ethan's stance before the board circulated too. Not apology, not shame, but defiance. By afternoon, #ClaraSpeaks trended above sports scores. By evening, Richard's name twinned with words like fraud and cover-up. Yet the backlash came quick. Legal notices drafted overnight, threats of custody challenges, whispers of unfit mother seeded in sympathetic outlets. A grainy photo of the twins at a playground surfaced online before Marissa's team stamped it out. Clara saw it once, her knees buckling at the sight of her children in someone else's lens. Ethan caught her before she fell, the paper crumpling in her fist. That night, the penthouse was quiet except for the ticking of pipes. Ethan laid more documents on the study desk, evidence of embezzlement, transfers Richard had thought too clever to trace. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. Both of them looked wrung out, shadows heavy under their eyes. "This isn't over," she said softly. "No," he agreed, "but for once we're not the ones hiding." They shared the silence like a fragile truce. Outside, snow stopped falling. For the first time in weeks, the city lights reached the ground unbroken. The city woke under a sky the color of tin, the kind of gray that makes even glass towers look ashamed of themselves. Boston traffic moved slow, like it had heard rumors and wanted to rubberneck the day ahead. In the penthouse, Ethan tied his cuffs without ceremony. He looked like a man ready for church, though the sermon would be a boardroom and the hymns balance sheets. Clara stood at the window with her coat over her arm, watching snow twitch sideways in the wind. Neither spoke of breakfast. Both knew appetite was a luxury you left behind when walking into a fight. At 9 sharp, Richard Montgomery climbed a podium in the ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel. He looked every inch the patriarch he wanted to be. Silver hair arranged like an inheritance. Voice warm enough to fry butter. The cameras adored him. He had made sure of that, inviting every friendly outlet in town. "My family's name," he began, "has stood for stability in this city for generations. We have built, We have given, we have endured. Now certain individuals, hurt, confused, would tarnish that legacy with tales that do not bear scrutiny. Reporters scribbled, like school children chasing chalk. Richard's smile was patient, fatherly. A waitress with grievances. A nephew distracted by sentiment. We do not run companies on sentiment. We run them on strength. The words were honeyed poison. Clara, watching on a small screen in the waiting room downstairs, felt them like a draft under the door. He was rewriting her into a footnote, a cautionary tale for men too soft to resist love. Her fist tightened in her lap, knuckles pale. Upstairs on 14, the board gathered. The room smelled of lemon polish and nerves. Ethan entered without flourish. Marissa at his side, folder under her arm like a sword in a sheath. He took the head of the table opposite Richard's empty chair, because the man couldn't be in two places at once, though arrogance had convinced him he could. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice low, unhurried, "I will not waste time answering gossip. What concerns us is truth. And truth, his receipts." He nodded to Marissa. She opened the folder, pages crisp, numbers precise, wire transfers blooming like weeds across shell companies Richard had hidden behind, contracts awarded at midnight to firms with no employees, a loan drawn twice, repaid never. The board leaned in as if gravity itself had shifted. "These," Ethan said, tapping the top sheet, "are not mistakes. They are thefts. Millions funneled through side doors while Richard Montgomery lectured us on stability." I was silent once. That silence cost me 6 years of my life. I won't be silent while he steals yours. A director with spectacles perched low on his nose cleared his throat. "And you have proof this ties directly to Richard?" Marissa slid another document forward, a signature, bold and unmistakable. She didn't smile. Lawyers never waste a smile on checkmate. The room exhaled in unison, a sound like a sail catching wind. One by one, heads turned towards the empty chair, and the polished oak seemed suddenly to sneer at its absent occupant. Meanwhile, Richard's press conference soured. Reporters pressed harder. What about the financial irregularities? What of the leaked contracts? His smile cracked, the corners stiff. "Baseless," he snapped. "The company thrives. You'll see at the next quarter." But the rhythm faltered. A phone buzzed in the front row. Confirmation that the board had begun deliberations without him. A murmur spread. For the first time in years, Richard Montgomery looked like a man checking his pockets for something he might have forgotten: his own credibility. By noon, the verdict came. The board suspended him pending investigation, unanimous, save one abstention from a man too old to matter. The press release landed like a brick through stained glass. Montgomery, executive suspended amid financial misconduct probe. Clara saw it scroll across the screen in the lobby. She closed her eyes and let her lungs empty, not with relief exactly, but with the absence of the weight she'd carried so long she had forgotten its shape. She looked at Ethan when he came down the hall, his shoulders square, tie slightly askew. For once, he didn't look like a man calculating. He looked like a man finished with calculation. "It's done," he said. "Not all of it," she answered, voice quiet. "No," he admitted, "but enough to start again." They walked out together into the brittle light of winter noon. Snow still fell, but softer now, flakes spinning like they'd grown tired of fighting the air. Reporters surged, cameras flashing, questions thrown like hail. Ethan raised a hand, shielding Clara as if his body could blunt curiosity. She kept her chin high, Coat pulled tight, and for the first time, the noise didn't feel like a verdict. It felt like background, the world rushing to catch up. Behind them, Richard Montgomery's empire sagged under its own rot. Ahead, the city stretched gray and cold, but also clean, like a slate just waiting for chalk. The days after Richard's fall passed with a quiet Clara almost didn't trust. The papers carried his name like a banner, but not with pride. Words like embezzlement and fraudulent transfers hung beside his face, and men who had once lined up to shake his hand now treated him like a stain that wouldn't wash. For Clara, the noise was background, something distant like the city's traffic heard from a high window. For the first time in 6 years, she woke without wondering who might be at the door. Ethan threw himself into meetings, but not the kind Richard had loved. No more cigars and bluster. Instead, he met with architects, community leaders, and nonprofits. He carried a set of blueprints rolled under his arm, and when Clara finally asked what he was plotting, he laid them flat across the dining table. Rows of modest brick townhomes stretched across the page, each with windows wide enough to drink in light. Playgrounds tucked in corners, benches on every block. Affordable housing, he said simply. Families who've had to choose between heat and rent. I thought. He hesitated, searching her face. I thought of that night. The bench. If I can keep one family from sitting there, I should. She traced the outline of a small square, maybe a courtyard, in the corner of the plan. Her eyes softened, but stayed wary. You don't have to do this because of me. I'm doing it because of us, he answered. Because I was 6 years too late. And this is one way to start closing that distance. Clara didn't argue. She had learned the futility of resisting every kindness. It only left you more tired than before. The twins thrived in the lull. Their son's cough thinned to a memory, and their daughter discovered the joy of watercolor paints, leaving the kitchen counter freckled in blue and green. Ethan, once tentative, grew into fatherhood like it had been waiting in his muscles all along. Bedtime stories told with voices for every character, shoelaces tied with more patience than business partners had ever seen from him. Clara watched him with suspicion at first, as though love might be another scheme. But suspicion gave way to recognition. This was the man who had once carried her books across a campus lawn, who had kissed her under a summer rain and sworn he'd never let her walk alone. One evening, after the twins had finally surrendered to sleep, Clara found him on the balcony. The city stretched below, lights blinking like quiet promises. He held 2 mugs of tea, steam rising into the cold. You're quieter lately, she said, accepting the mug. Maybe I finally ran out of speeches, he replied, half a smile in the dark. They stood shoulder to shoulder, the silence between them softer now, not the brittle glass it once had been. Clara sipped her tea and thought of how many nights she had stood alone at different windows, wishing for exactly this. Another body to share the air, another hand to brush hers when words felt too heavy. A week later, Ethan suggested a walk. The twins bundled into coats too large for their small frames, scarves dragging, mittens mismatched. Clara hesitated when he turned down Tremont Street, the name alone enough to freeze her breath. But the children tugged her forward, eager to race ahead. The bench was still there, pressed against the brick wall, metal chipped from salt and seasons. Snow crusted its edges, but the center was bare, as though waiting. Clara stopped in front of it, memory striking like wind off the harbor. She had sat here with her arms around 2 shivering children, believing the world had no use for them. Now those same children darted in circles, laughter echoing against storefronts. Their son chased his sister, both of them leaving trails of boot prints in the slush. Clara felt her throat tighten. Ethan lowered himself onto the bench, patting the space beside him. She sat, coat brushing his, the metal cold beneath them. For a moment, neither spoke. "This is where it started again," he said finally. Her breath plumed white in the air. "This is where I thought it ended." He turned to her, eyes steady. "We almost missed it." Clara let her hand rest on the bench between them. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan covered it with his. Not pressing, not demanding, just there, warm and solid. She didn't pull away. The twins came running back, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. They clambered onto the bench, wedging themselves between their parents, giggling as they fought for space. Clara laughed then, a sound so unguarded it startled her. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and for once she didn't look away. The city moved around them, cars humming past, a man hurrying with a bag of groceries, the distant bark of a dog. Ordinary sounds, the kind of music you only notice after years of chaos. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow, catching in the children's hair, melting on Clara's lashes. She let it, no longer afraid of cold nights. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking of what she had lost. She was thinking of what she might keep. The bench on Tremont Street held them all, not as fugitives from the past, but as a family finally choosing to sit still.